So it's funny. I was talking to a few contacts on the subject of Sapphire Rapids, and, well, I can't go into too many details, but at first I simply learned a lot about the insane security measures Intel has in place for testing. To be entirely honest, it sounds like it might be easier to launch a nuke than to boot up some of these engineering sample Sapphire Rapids boards, unless, well, you're the person meant to boot it up. So, first of all, I guess what I'm saying, or what I want to say at the beginning of this video is, anytime you see a Sapphire Rapids benchmark leak out over half a year before launch, that was either an insane screw-up internally, or they tried to leak that for buzz. Like, there aren't almost ever sneaky people running around with these things, benchmarking them from some basement, unless it's practically the final silicon like a quarter before launch that just shipped early. Which, on that note, I guess related to this, I'll confirm that Sapphire Rapids is nearing final silicon. And upon hearing about this milestone and seeing some new pictures of the CPUs from some of my contacts, it got me thinking, when the heck is this launching to HEDT? And will Intel have an opening next year against AMD? Well, before I actually started digging on Sapphire Rapids HEDT, I looked around at recent leaks, and it seems like, yeah, it makes sense. A lot of people are saying that a Sapphire Rapids workstation or HEDT platform will launch within about a quarter of this server launch, maybe a little later than that, which is, well, Q3 2022. And yeah, that makes sense to me. If I was Intel, I wouldn't be waiting multiple quarters to launch their HEDT variant like AMD seems hell-bent on doing with Threadripper compared to their, I don't know, epic architectures lately. Intel needs to launch something. They've been selling the same badly reviewed 14 nanometer CPUs since 2019, and, well, those lose to Alder Lake. So if point number one is they've been losing badly for years with a horribly uncompetitive product, it's also worth pointing out a second point here, that their desktop platform is arguably, no, I would say factually their best HEDT platform right now. It's just Z690 with an i9 is better than Cascade Lake X. That's how old and outdated it is. Unless you get, of course, Ice Lake X, which those are actually workstation chips, not HEDT. We're going to talk about that more later in this video, that distinction. But anyways, furthermore, AMD is taking market share from server. So if point number one is how outdated their platform is, and point number two is literally their consumer platform is beating their HEDT platform, point number three would be that, well, a luxury of losing some server market share to a competitor means you'll probably have some capacity free to launch an HEDT chip. They can probably afford to launch this platform next to their server counterparts much more easily than AMD will be able to. Well, yeah, so a Q3 launch makes sense to me next year. And in fact, as I was finishing the first version of this script, reached out to a handful of Intel sources, as I usually do, to confirm this hunch. And, well, one of my longest standing sources got back to me with an indication that indeed, internal whispers are that it should be announced mid-2022 and launched by the end of Q3. And other sources said it would definitely launch by Q4. And it's not like that's ultimately surprising, but it's been a while since I've thought about HEDT competition next year and looked back at my Threadripper roadmap, which stated, well, if AMD really has canceled Chagall and Chagall 3D, then yeah, I guess maybe there is a huge opening here for Intel, right? It almost feels like AMD is abandoning HEDT altogether. And why would they do that unless Intel is as well? Well, I'm starting to hint at some of the revelations that I'm going to say later in this video. What started as a simpler half opinion, half analysis leak video a week ago has evolved into me gaining access to multiple pieces of bombshell information about how the HEDT and workstation competition is going to evolve over the next couple of years. There's going to be a lot of changes soon. And I'm going to break down why Intel may have an opening in this market, or why both AMD and Intel may abandon it completely. But first, an ad from a sponsor. Reese, stop lounging around. Black Friday is right now if you know what you're doing. You see, my dog Reese here is stuck in the past. She thinks you need to lose sleep and hound all of the latest deals on a single day if you want the best deals for shopping this holiday season. That's just simply not true anymore. If you want the best deals on Steam, PlayStation, Xbox, and Windows keys, go to cdkeyoffers.com all November to get special discounts site-wide. Use offer code BrokenSilicon to get a special 30% discount. This is the biggest discount on their website right now if you're building a shiny new Alder Lake system. And again, remember, you can use the code DieShrink to get 3% off everything else on the website. Whether you want to get the shopping for software keys out of the way now or just get something you want right now, don't be like Reese. Don't wait. Get all of the online keys you need, whether Windows or gaming, at cdkeyoffers.com all November. Again, use offer code BrokenSilicon for 30% off Windows keys and use the code DieShrink for 3% off everything else on the website. Using cdkeyoffers.com with these codes helps Moore's Law is dead a lot, and it saves you money. Go to cdkeyoffers.com today. All right, like I said before the break, this video started as a simpler opinion video informed by some whispers. I was intending to do a video outlining Intel and AMD's options for HEDT or not HEDT late next year and try to give some advice on, well, people waiting to upgrade to a new HEDT platform. I know someone here in Nashville that has been asking me what the next upgrade option is, and I've told them, honestly, you might have to wait a whole other year or more. And so, yeah, it gave me the inspiration to do this video. But you know, after the initial sources, some more early sources got back to me and had really interesting things to say that sent me down a rabbit hole. All right, Sapphire Rapids HEDT workstation leak. I'm going to start by presenting what my early info was so you can see why this became a much bigger video than initially intended. All right. The first early source, who is someone who has been a reliable Intel source of mine since 2019, this is someone that contributed to that Whispers of Gold & Co. video. This person said that Sapphire Rapids HEDT should launch by Q3 or maybe Q4, and that there's also a workstation platform as well that should have an insane I/O advantage over at least existing Threadripper, and that honestly, Sapphire Rapids HEDT and workstation may be a wake-up call for AMD's decision to neglect Threadripper for this long. This person was really confident in how competitive a mainstream Sapphire Rapids set of platforms may be next year. So that was exciting. Now, another source. Now, this is an essential Moore's Law is dead source for AMD, Intel, and NVIDIA information since 2020. This person told me that the current whispers are that Sapphire Rapids HEDT launches by the end of Q3, and that it basically sounds like Xeon-W without ECC. That was that 28-core like Cascade Lake X 14-nanometer chip that they allowed you to overclock. It was kind of a desperate ploy to compete with Threadripper, but it honestly had its own uses relative to Threadripper. So something like this, but without ECC, is what this person is expecting. Then a third source got back to me. This is an essential Moore's Law is dead source since 2019. This person has an unrivaled track record. There are a few people that if I get information from, I'm willing to run with as a video or tweet of a leak without verifying with other people first. But this is one of those people that if this person tells me it, I'm sure it's almost certainly true. The track record is just incredible. This person told me that HEDT is end of life at Intel, and I did push back and ask if this person meant just the existing platforms. No. I was told there are no plans for a direct replacement of Cascade Lake X. That basically that whole Core X series is dead, and well, what the How can this be true? I had very conflicting info from multiple of my very best sources. And the one of those sources that's never been wrong says HEDT may be canceled. And at the same time, any time in the past, I've noticed where I had conflicting info between some of my best sources that usually meant there was some key details that were simply being missed by either me or everyone involved, that nobody realized that actually their information did not conflict. that everyone just was missing a key detail and it needed to be dug into further. After all, that Lovelace Switch 2 combo leak came from me digging extra hard on an insanely conflicting whisper about Lovelace from one of my best sources too. So, having learned from experience, this required a lot more info. This report should not be rushed out. And, well, after digging insanely hard and getting access to some incredibly comprehensive information that allowed me to slowly fill in the gaps on what the heck is going on with non-server Sapphire Rapids. Let me show you what I mean. So here's a little chart I have put together summarizing a handful of Sapphire Rapids engineering samples that I'm aware of. Now, this is certainly not all of them, but this should be enough to illustrate the differences between two groups of products that I was coming across fairly consistently once I added up all of the information. And yeah, I will also say this in the beginning here. I have vagified some of this info, like exact TDPs and clock speeds and the amount of cache. I mean, specifically when it comes to the amount of cache, you might think it's silly for me not to tell you exactly how many megabytes the top model is, but if you look it up, Intel hasn't confirmed it yet. Yeah, that's because they're reserving that as a way to get leakers. If you know the exact cache amount, they can trace back something. So yeah, I'm not crazy. I'm not paranoid. It really is important that I vagify this info a little bit. Yeah, so some of these have support for 8 CPUs on one motherboard, and some of them did not. Okay, and then all the ones that only supported one socket had overclocking enabled and unlocked power limits. So yeah, these did not seem to me like server products, and they were typically clocked higher with higher TDPs for corresponding core counts. Like here's the 36 core, under 350 watts, but this one was well under 300 watts. So yeah, I mean, there you go. This is a situation where clearly there are two distinct groups, and one of them is at least workstation or HEDT. And then I got some pictures of the board layouts, and some of the boards did not look like server motherboards. They looked like workstation motherboards. And no, I'm not going to show you, but, well, these layouts were labeled Fishhawk Falls, which is the code name I've seen other people talking about online for a while now. So there you go. There were clearly at least two distinct platforms here, and one that wasn't server. Now, this is when people would yell at their screen usually and go, well, there you go. HEDT is definitely not canceled from Intel. But here's the thing. 112 Gen 5 PCIe lanes? That's pretty crazy for HEDT, even in 2022. And, well, I mean, the XCC configuration was listed for a lot of these models. I didn't see MCC listed anywhere for a while. So XCC, that's the extreme core count. That's usually reserved for top workstation or server, not for HEDT, classically for Intel. And in fact, nothing was labeled as a core anything. It was all Xeon. So when I poured over this, I was like, I don't know, actually. There's clearly some more consumer-focused platform than what a server platform would be with overclocking support. But yeah, I don't know. There is evidence Intel may be killing HEDT, and it got me thinking for a while. I mean, do we need HEDT anymore? Is there a reason AMD is only giving Threadripper Pro Zen 3? Is it because not only do they not feel like they need to innovate in HEDT right now due to lack of competition, but they also only think Intel will try to compete in workstation as well? Honestly, does HEDT really make sense, like literally at all anymore? Not just in terms of if you need to launch it for competition. I mean, if we use Threadripper as an example, Zen 1, they were effectively starting from zero market share, so it made sense to launch a premium platform next to Epic because there would be plenty of months where they have extra Epic chips lying around. And frankly, AM4 was limited to 8 cores. The quad-core stagnation was long overdue to pass over, right? There weren't just people that wanted more than 4 cores. They wanted more than 8 cores now. We've been stuck on 4 or 6 cores, or maybe up to 10 if you were paying thousands of dollars. That there was a very real reason, a need for consumers to have more than 8 cores, and AM4 didn't offer more than 8 cores with Zen 1. And, Epic also never got Zen Plus, so there was never this worry about pulling yields away from Epic for Threadripper with Zen Plus. Then we get to Zen 2 Threadripper, and, Well, as I pointed out in my Threadripper roadmap video, that took way longer to come out for obvious reasons. And frankly, AMD, a lot of people don't remember this, AMD didn't launch the 64 core until 2020. Like over half a year after the initial Zen 2 products launched in reality. So yeah, I am told that Lisa was reluctant to even release a Zen 2 Threadripper in 2019 at all. And they only did so because, well, they wanted to twist the knife and they knew it was expected of them. But it was really hard for Lisa Su and the executives to justify why they would bother launching a Zen 2 Threadripper when EPYC orders were through the roof and Intel wasn't even competing with Zen 1, let alone Zen Plus, let alone a Zen 2 Threadripper. And in fact, I'm told it's becoming even harder for AMD to justify launching new Threadripper platforms. Zen 3 demand is entirely through the roof, and that is the major reason they never launched that to Threadripper. They have no reason. Intel isn't competing, and they're making much more profits in EPYC. And not only that, but it's important to establish relationships with EPYC products as soon as possible because, well, consumers like me will jump between AMD and Intel as often as they want. But once you get a server contract with a company, they're likely to keep using your products for a decade. So there's a reason AMD is neglecting Threadripper right now. And I'm told, honestly, that Milan-X Zen 3D EPYC is even more in demand than Zen 3. That's why they've not only supposedly canceled Chagall, but also Chagall 3D. And so I don't think the demand is going to go down anytime soon. When I look at my old Threadripper info, I'm starting to be able to believe why they may go 3 years without launching something, and that's really why. And in fact, realizing this, going through this history, makes me understand why Intel moved to a 1-year delayed release for HEDT. Honestly, people hated it, but now that I look at AMD's motivations, I think we're lucky Intel ever had HEDT products past Sandy Bridge. If you're in hot demand, why even bother? But again, if AMD is considering ignoring HEDT, and they are, by the way, for all of 2022, then I just have to believe Intel isn't going to launch just Workstation. They have a very real opening here, and the fact that AMD's taking server market share means if they launch it, they can probably supply it. They really should do this to win back some mind share amongst enthusiasts. Well, I kept gigging and digging, and I finally found proof of an MCC, a mid-core count configuration of Sapphire Rapids with 64 Gen 5 PCIe lanes. Now, I can't show what my proof is, but I will say there are clearly two distinct versions of the XCC products. There is the SPR-SP, so that's Sapphire Rapids server version of the top XCC configuration. And then there is what is called the workstation version with 112 PCIe lanes and possibly up to 56 cores. But then there's also a mid-core count configuration that has one version of it labeled as SPR SP, so for server, and then again, a mainstream workstation version with just 64 PCIe lanes. And so there we go. And yeah, once I came across this info and I went to a few other sources, well, I got one of my sources that I felt like was really holding out on me for a while there to confirm that yes, this stood for mainstream workstation and Core X i9X may be dead, but HEDT is not dead at Intel. No, instead of calling it Core i9X editions, they're going to call it Extreme Editions of Xeon, right? Which, by the way, makes sense to compete with Threadripper. Let's be clear, this is long overdue. I have long thought that the Core i9 naming scheme was absurd and destroyed their brand segmentation. I mean, think about that. An i9 9900K with 8 cores is an i9, and so is an 18-core i9 10980XE. So most of the product stack's core counts are i9. That's ridiculous. It makes sense why you would just call these extreme Xeons to compete with Threadripper, and that's what it seems like Intel is doing, and so there you go. Now my source's information is not conflicting. They are end-of-lifing what would be Cascade Lake X, but it's because they're going all out with a more Threadripper-like platform because competition means they have to. And without further ado, yeah, I'm going to tell you what it's going to be. What does Intel have to launch with this opening they may have against AMD Threadripper? Well, the first thing I will say is please keep in mind that mainstream workstation is possibly a year away still. So it's early, and they have plenty of time to change their minds on how they will segment or name things. It is still too early to double down on exact configurations yet, but I do believe I'm going to reveal enough information to give people who have been holding their breath for a new HEDT platform an idea of what's coming in the second half of 2022. So there will be two platforms. The first one, the workstation platform, succeeding Ice Lake X Xeon series from last year. Right now, they're testing 56 Golden Cove cores boosting above 4 gigahertz. Now, I say testing because, well, lately, Intel has typically given even the top workstation platforms less cores than the very highest core count server chips. So it would not surprise me at all if they don't end up releasing 56 cores, at least right away. But that is what they're testing now. I just can't promise you they won't cap out at, like, I don't know, 52, 48, or 44 cores. We'll have to see. And I have seen core counts all the way down to 12 cores being tested. I can't say all of the core configurations I've seen because it could, reveal who my sources are a little bit. But I will say, yeah, there's a lot of different models, and people will be good to remember that the workstation Threadripper platforms had all kinds of core counts. And the top chip right now actually has a 350-watt TDP, even though it's boosting above 4 gigahertz. Now, I can't promise you again that they won't push it harder than that, but that is the TDP right now of the top Golden Cove workstation overclocking chip. And it has 8 channels of ECC DDR5 support at 4400 MT per second if you fill all 16 DIMMs. It's a lot of DIMMs. Or I have seen documentation that suggests 4800 if half of them are populated. And it has 112 PCIe Gen 5 lanes. This is just absurd. This is crazy I/O. Yeah, support for 1 CPU per motherboard. I think that's obvious, but I bring it up because I do remember before Zen 2 Threadripper launched, there were these rumors of like a Pro Threadripper with 2 sockets per motherboard. No, it's still just 1 socket per motherboard. The caveat I have to say is I have seen some of these engineering samples with some of their accelerators, or honestly, some of this stuff is above my head. I haven't actually analyzed the nitty-gritty of Sapphire Rapids that much. Some of the extra benefits in the Golden Cove iteration in Sapphire Rapids were cut down or reduced for the workstation models, at least for some of them. Remember, the Golden Cove in Sapphire Rapids is not the same as the Golden Cove in Alder Lake. And pricing, $3,000 to $5,000. Again, I would compare what I can say about Sapphire Rapids workstation pricing to what I said about Alder Lake pricing like half a year before it came out. A lot of people assumed it cost a ton, and I said it's a direct replacement for the previous generation. I wouldn't expect it to cost that much more. And now, the one most of you are probably interested in, the mainstream workstation platform. This is the spiritual successor to their Cascade Lake X HEDT and possibly overclockable Xeon-W platforms. So I cannot 100% confirm core counts yet, but I can say that I'm aware of the MCC as a different configuration, and I'm fairly confident it'll max out between 28 to 36 cores. If previous generations are any indication, I think they are. And that I would expect these, if I'm aware that the 56 core unlocked models are going above 4 gigahertz, then I would expect a 28 to 36 core one to, go to 4.5 or 5 gigahertz. Although again, MCC started development after the XCC configuration, so it's not as long into development. This will probably be confirmed, within a few months. And the TDP for this, I would say that right now, these models, there's a little bit of documentation out there suggesting they're using between 270 to 300 watts. But guys, I mean, I don't know. Competition may dictate that they push these to 400 watts at 5 gigahertz. And honestly, I'm not sure why they wouldn't at least push it to 350 watts. But at least right now, it's running below 300 watts, above or around 4.5 gigahertz. So the memory channel support. I cannot confirm it yet, but what I can confirm, as you saw earlier in this video, is that one source said that it might have 8-channel DDR5 without ECC. And so that is one way they may segment this. They may give the full 8 channels to both platforms, but the top workstation one is the one that gets ECC support. The other one does not. And Also, I've had it suggested they may cut it down to 4 channels of DDR5, maybe with or without ECC. What I'm most sure of is that Intel has not decided this yet, but I will say there is the whisper out there. The one whisper I do have that indicates the decision is that it might be just 8 channels without ECC, and yeah, that'd be a pretty interesting platform. 36 cores at 5 gigahertz, 8-channel DDR5, and 64 PCIe Gen 5 lanes. This is I don't know what you want to call it, mainstream Threadripper destroyer for the majority of people who would buy Threadripper. Not the 64 core, of course, but they will have a 56 core Golden Code platform for those people. All right, just like I said about Alder Lake and what I just said about the top platform, I am told this should occupy the same segments as the previous gen HEDT and maybe Xeon-W. So, in other words, I wouldn't be surprised if they charge more for the bottom model, if the bottom model were to start at like 24 cores, but I would not be surprised if that 24 core was like $1,000 and the 36 core was $2,000 to $2,500. It just depends on how high the clock speeds go, and if AMD launches any competition. If AMD doesn't, I think Intel can get away with $3,000 for a 5 gigahertz 36 core with Gen 5 PCIe, but we're just going to have to see. At the very least, just like Alder Lake was, this will be priced competitively. Right, that price range that I said, $1,000 to $3,000, and possibly, honestly, some models below $1,000. If you look at the entry-level HEDT products Intel has had in the past, that's actually pretty aggressive pricing when you consider, well, the swath of scenarios of competitiveness that pricing covers. Right, Zen 2 Threadripper is getting pretty god-dang old, and well, they had $2,000 before for 32 cores. That's Zen 2 cores. If Intel launches a 36 core at 5 gigahertz, I think this would be the equivalent of a 48 core Zen 2 in multi-threading. And I would warn you to not be surprised if it beats the 3990X at almost everything, actually. This is a worst case scenario for Zen 2 Threadripper, which was the one CPU to rule them all in 2020. But guys, it's 2022. Zen 2 is getting old. If I compare the only 8 big core plus 4 little core i7 from Alder Lake to what I have, a 16 core Zen 2 in multi-threading, they're closer than you would think. 36 cores at 5 gigahertz may actually beat the 3990X at just about everything. So even if it's a 28 core at like 4.5 gigahertz, I think this is a real problem for AMD and might actually be why they're only upgrading Threadripper Pro. It's because that's the only one that will be able to compete. There's no point in trying to compete with the highly clocked mid-core count Sapphire Rapids. But do remember, again, this is all talking about if AMD doesn't launch Chagall 3D, which, talking to some sources, it's worth remembering that AMD can respond if they want to. They can decide 2 to 3 months before the launch, maybe even 1 month if it's a paper launch, that, hey, actually, no, we want to launch Chagall 3D. This Sapphire Rapids mainstream workstation isn't coming out until Q3 at the earliest next year, and Milan-X launches early next year. So they could sit there, wait for more Sapphire Rapids stuff to come out, and then go, we're launching it, and then just decide to launch a Chagall 3D to Threadripper mid-2022. Honestly, it's just all going to come down to if AMD sees Intel Sapphire Rapids mainstream workstation as a real threat. If they do, they have room to maneuver here if they choose to. And honestly, I just can't help but think about it. If they're really not going to launch Chagall or Chagall 3D, I would think AMD is going to push up the launch of Storm Peak to be a 2022 launch so that they really don't go 3 years without launching a new Threadripper product. Either that, or honestly, I do think it would make more sense for AMD to simply launch a Zen 3D Threadripper mid next year for the fact that they can dual source, right? I understand AMD, right? I understand why you want to supply your customers with EPYC before bothering with Threadripper. But you can do that for the first half of 2022 and then launch, you can launch Zen 3D to Threadripper once you start meeting those orders. And that, in fact, would allow you to have a new Threadripper product out there on the market, competing with Sapphire Rapids, not letting Intel completely blow you away in all benchmarks. Will you supply Zen 4 EPYC for about a half a year or a year? I would think if AMD can supply Zen 3D Threadripper mid next year, people would understand why a Zen 4 Threadripper may not come out until mid 2023. You could dual source then, and that's what I think AMD should do. And so I guess it's time for some concluding advice to HEDT shoppers. Many of you are beleaguered. Built a Zen 2 HEDT system at the end of 2019. Here we are, late 2021, and I'm telling you that you may have to wait a whole other year. But, well, yeah, that's basically the advice then. If you are holding your breath to build an HEDT system and you need some soon, come up for air and build now, because nothing is coming from either of these companies for at least half a year. And AMD has no impetus to launch anything until Intel does. Zero reason for them to do so until Intel can compete. And that means Intel has a real opening in HEDT if AMD really does neglect Threadripper all next year. So I think that means that you can expect Intel to stay the course and launch Sapphire Rapids HEDT mid to late 2022, and if you're holding your breath and can do it a little longer, that's the platform you're going to be waiting for, because, well, yes, AMD may launch something, but right now there's zero evidence of it. I may think they should launch a Zen 3D Threadripper to tide people over, well, until they decide to launch a Zen 4 Threadripper. But that's what I would do. I don't have all of the numbers. I'm not trying to balance all of these profit margins. I weigh mind share and gamer goodwill more than I do profit margins, because I'm not the corporation itself. So keep in mind that it's probably just going to be Intel next year that you'll be able to choose from. And, well, yeah, that's because AMD is simply firmly in charge of HEDT right now. Like I said in my unquestioned leadership after that data center keynote AMD had, they have complete dominance, and this is what dominance looks like. Not needing to compete because, well, your competition can't even compete with several gen-old products. And so I really hope Intel doesn't just stay the course with this Sapphire Rapids mainstream workstation stuff that I've just leaked to you today, but that they do so at full throttle, that they don't hold back. They give you the 56 cores, they give you 36 cores in the low-end mainstream workstation, and that they price it aggressively. So AMD gets slaps and never neglects HEDT again. All right, I hope you enjoyed that. I've got a lot more leaks coming, of course, about AMD and Intel CPU products coming out. So you're going to want to subscribe to the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel and ring the bell button so you don't miss those. I've also got a lot more ARC information coming very soon, amongst other stuff. There's really just so much going on. 2022 is going to be crazy. You're not going to want to miss it. And also remember to subscribe to Broken Silicon on your podcast app of choice. Give us a review. That really helps us. And, well, above all else, if you can, consider supporting Moore's Law is Dead on Patreon, where you'll get early ad-free access to Broken Silicon, the ability to ask me and guest questions, vote on the exclusive podcast Die Shrink that is only to patrons. We've got one coming out now about corporate consolidation. That's for the patrons. It's all there, only $2 a month if you want it. We really do need as many Patreon supporters as we can get to prioritize ad-free content and to make sure we have that baseline level of support for me, Gerard, Dan, and hopefully more people that I want to hire onto the Moore's Law is Dead team soon. This could be so much bigger, but, enough of me yammering. Thank you to everybody who watched this.